Excellent. Just a quick question before we begin. How many were here for the first lecture? Oh, good, okay, so about half. So good, okay. As Monsignor said at the end of Mass, my name is Matthew Lomanno. I'm the Communications Director here at St. Matthew. If you don't know, so I'm not a common face here. I just kind of work behind the scenes and website, Facebook, things like that, special projects, design things like that. So, all right, and does everyone have a card? Everyone got one of those? Okay, thank you, thank you. I'm pleased to return tonight to discuss the second of the three paintings by Caravaggio concerning the life of St. Matthew. Thank you again to Monsignor and the St. Matthew Parish community for the invitation. For those of you who heard the first lecture about the calling of St. Matthew, I hope you will indulge us with a brief review of my approach to understanding fine art for the sake of those who are not present the first time round. And it works, okay. All right, first of all, art is anything made by humans. That is, whatever is not given by nature. Everything surrounding us in this church is a product of art. Okay? Art is made for different reasons or purposes or goals. Useful objects or artworks are made for particular functions, and we judge them according to how well they do or don't do that function. Decorative art pertains to an object's design. An object's use is separate from its design, and we know this because we can distinguish how well an object functions from how it looks. A useful knife could be plain and not very interesting to look at. A well-designed knife could be useless, right? So we see that these things have different functions and different ends or purposes. The fine arts, or the arts of the beautiful, are distinct from these other kinds of art. Because they are distinct, they have their own particular purpose or goal, thus they are not useful or decorative. The fine arts exist for the sake of their own beauty. That beauty is found within the object in itself, not some other further purpose or goal. Thus, it is contrary to the useful arts. And how do we define beautiful? I'm going to rely on St. Thomas Aquinas here. He states that the beautiful is that which pleases when apprehended. The beautiful then is sensible. We have to be able to see it or hear it. And recognizing the beautiful in an object is a rational activity that acknowledges an object as beautiful without reference to our own physical or moral good. So if we see delicious food, we want to eat it, we want to consume it, right? That's not the case with a beautiful object. We want to experience it, but we don't want it kind of in a, we don't want to ingest it or so, like, we don't want it to become part of us. We just want to continually gaze upon it or listen to it, right? But why are we pleased by seeing or hearing beautiful objects? According to St. Thomas again, the source of our pleasure derives from our apprehension or recognition of order within the object. We apprehend the object, we recognize the order present in it, and that experience pleases us. Order pleases us. I've been reflecting on this a little bit, and I think most of our human life is we're trying to order nature, right? Imagine disordered traffic patterns or driving, right? It would be impossible. We couldn't function, right? The church building is ordered in a particular way, right? Everything that we try to do in human society is to try to order our existence to help fulfill our goals. Fine art is no different. It's an ordering of the materials, but not for some further end, like being able to drive someplace or being able to see the altar. No, we just want it just to be able to see the object or hear the object. St. Thomas says, quote, "These sensations are pleasurable in themselves." And what in particular does St. Thomas understand order to be regarding the beautiful object? He lists three kinds that are all present in a beautiful object. The first is integrity, or unity, right? So it looks like one thing, it doesn't look like multiple things, right? It has a kind of cohesion to it. Proportion, that is, the parts are harmoniously arranged within each other. And third, clarity. The whole and the parts are clear and distinct, if you will. If an object has these qualities, it is well ordered. Jumped ahead a little bit. Thus, one's reaction to a thing as being beautiful or being ugly is not a feeling or emotion, but a judgment of reason. This also means that we can articulate why we think an object is beautiful or not, and that's really my goal tonight, is to talk about this painting and its attributes, and to try to be able to articulate why we think it's beautiful or why we don't think it's beautiful, right? So now we get to the inspiration of St. Matthew. In general, we have very little historical information about Caravaggio's life and works. Most of what we know, he didn't really write anything down, right? Most of what we know is from official documents, legal records, contracts, things like that. Caravaggio's full name, he was born Michelangelo Merisi da, from Caravaggio, in 1571. The name Michelangelo was kind of already popular and taken, so he fine, I'll take Caravaggio. Okay, that's. In 1599, he received his first public commissions for 2 paintings for a side chapel in the church of San Luigi dei Francesi. These paintings were to portray the calling and the martyrdom of St. Matthew. Both were completed by 1600, all right? So we know that there's kind of this trilogy of paintings, right? The calling, the inspiration, and the martyrdom, right? It was this first commission was for the first and the last painting is what we consider now, okay? So it was for the calling and the martyrdom of St. Matthew. What about the inspiration? So yeah, there we go, both are what about this painting? Although chronologically between the historical events of St. Matthew's calling and martyrdom, so in the context of St. Matthew's life, the painting was commissioned in 1602, 2 years after the other 2 were completed. Okay, so the congregation of priests took a little while before they decided they wanted another one. Thus, our discussion of the paintings are ordered according to their historical occurrence in St. Matthew's life, not in the order of artistic production. What do we know about this work? The commission states that Caravaggio was asked to paint St. Matthew seated with a book or volume to write his gospel, and next to him an angel standing beyond natural who acts in what seems to be reasoning or in another attitude. All right, that's a quote from the contract. Does that describe this? No. No, it doesn't. This isn't what we see in front of us. Why not? Because the first version of this painting was rejected. Okay? Imagine Caravaggio brings the canvas in, the priests see it and say, nope, that's not it. Before we proceed to that, however, a brief note about the title. It's actually called St. Matthew and the Angel. It's not the inspiration of St. Matthew, so we're just going to make a little edit here. So we'll be calling this St. Matthew and the Angel now. Here's the first version. It's nearly, the original, this was 7.5 by 6 feet. So it was smaller in both dimensions and notably narrower than the first 2 paintings. The first 2 paintings are about the same size, roughly, about 10 by 10. This is much smaller, okay? This painting, the reason why it's in black and white is because it was destroyed in 1945. The original was, so when the priests rejected it, a private individual bought the painting immediately, and it was still in existence for 500 years up until it was in Germany, and it was destroyed during one of the bombings there in World War II. All right, so all that we have left are these archival black and white photographs. Obviously, we can't see the color, unfortunately, but we can still discuss the composition, which actually fairly closely adheres to the commission's request, right? He actually did what the priest asked him to do. St. Matthew is seated, he's writing, while an angel stands next to him. So how can we describe this work? The figures fill the composition. There's very little negative space. Remember in the calling, St. Matthew, we're pretty far back. We can see 7 different figures, right? And none of them are larger than half of the painting, the height of the painting, right? Here, this is the full painting, right? So these 2 figures fill up the whole composition. There's very little negative space. The figures are very close to each other. St. Matthew is intensely concentrated on writing. And actually, you might not be able to see it, maybe here. He's actually writing in Hebrew. Why? Does anyone know why he would be writing in Hebrew? Monsignor Pop. Right, who was his audience? Yeah. So Caravaggio actually has him writing in Hebrew, which is a fascinating little detail there. The angel guides his hand as if writing the text for him, while also watching closely what he writes. Finally, St. Matthew's cloak hangs on the back of the chair. He resembles a workman or a laborer toiling away at his task. Why was it rejected? We don't really know. We have very little documentation about why. An author writing about 70 years later said that the priests who commissioned it were unpleased with the appearance of St. Matthew. He appears to be a peasant, sitting casually, legs and feet prominently exposed. They said, this isn't really what we want to see in St. Matthew. This is, again, according to someone who was living 70 years later. So there may have been stories that kind of were passed down why. That's the best we have. Remember, this painting is right above the altar, right? So it's the left of the altar is the calling, to the right of the altar is the martyrdom, and this is going to be center. So if you're in front of the altar and knowing it's above, what are you going to see first? You're going to see his feet first, right? So that's a pretty good indication that this might be kind of why the priest was like, no, this is not it, right? And clearly, St. Matthew does look like he's laboring, right? And his brow is really furrowed, right? And the angel is really doing, it seems, most of the work there. As I mentioned, the rejected work was immediately purchased by a private collector, and a, quote, outraged Caravaggio, again, according to our author from 70 years later, began work on the next version. All right, so now we can see, these aren't to scale, so this is the way they kind of formatted. I formatted them to fit the screen. So we can see the 2 versions here, and then of course we have a physical copy as well. First, I'd like to note the significant changes that Caravaggio made to the second version, which include both changes pertaining to the depiction of the subjects and the composition. All right, so the dimensions. At nearly 10 feet by 6 feet, it's similar in height to the first 2 paintings, but narrower by nearly a half. Okay, so really the other ones, remember, especially the calling is almost perfectly a square. Actually, we haven't gotten to the martyrdom yet. The same is true there. It's also a square. This is much more rectangular, right? It's much more vertical. But they're all the same height, okay? In other words, St. Matthew and the Angel is rather smaller in total area than the 2 other paintings. This proportional change accommodates the major difference of vertical composition. The angel, who remains next to St. Matthew, technically, right, is inverted 180 degrees on his head, okay? So the commission asked for the angel be next to St. Matthew, right? He's still next to St. Matthew here, right? He's just above. St. Matthew is also now the predominant figure in the painting, where the first version had each figure filling half of the composition laterally. St. Matthew now encompasses 2/3 of the vertical composition. Just more details about his position. His position has changed from sitting to partially standing, so again, he's kind of halfway in between. He wears multiple layers of clothing. In this one, his cloak was off. He was kind of down to his undershirt there. His feet and lower leg, while still bare, have been moved from the foreground to the midground plane and are predominantly in shadow as well, right? So we get the kind of the edge of his one of his feet there, and this whole leg is in shadow. He looks up expectantly at the angel, who is perhaps dictating the next passage, but not guiding his hand directly, right? So it's the second image seems to be much more. I mean, you can understand why it's called the inspiration, right? Because versus this is kind of like, I don't even know. It's almost like a controlling, right? That he's using, that the angel is doing the writing and not St. Matthew, right? All right, so vertical composition, St. Matthew's changes the angel. The angel's wings are no longer bright white, but dark, nearly indistinguishable from the background. It's it's almost impossible to see the angel's wings because there's so much black here, right? But this is one, and this is the other, okay? They're so dark, right? Whereas with the first version, they're the brightest points of the entire painting, right? Your eyes go right to the white. So really interesting change here for Caravaggio. And then obviously his garments, we don't know if these were colored or not, obviously, right? But the angel's garments are white now instead. So a pretty big change. Finally, the painting has a much greater amount of negative space and is primarily asymmetrical in composition, both vertically and horizontally, although even that is a simplification, as we'll see, right? So negative space refers to the area in an image that doesn't really have anything, right? So if I were composing an image, if I was outside and I wanted to get a view of the steeple and the cross of the church, right? And I place it in the composition, and I'm going to necessarily have some sky in there, and where I place it, the sky is considered negative space to my subject matter, which is the steeple and the cross, right? Likewise, anything that's black is considered negative space, right? There's just nothing there, right? Remember, we saw in the previous calling of St. Matthew some of the other compositions, the other painters who did the calling of St. Matthew, and they're very detailed backgrounds, right? That's not negative space, right? Because there are things happening there that he painted in, okay? And asymmetricals. So, oops, that was, sorry, okay. So far, we've only discussed the painting broadly in relation to its predecessor. What remains is to analyze in greater detail how Caravaggio ordered this painting. While the calling of St. Matthew had 7 figures, we are here given only 2, along with some furniture and St. Matthew's writing materials. 3 primary volumes can be seen throughout the work. So obviously the first one is St. Matthew, who takes up, like I said, about 2/3 of the painting. The angel takes up the top third, and then the table, and which also encompasses the stool, is kind of the bottom third. Similar to the calling, Caravaggio repeats and reinforces this rectangular shape in the furniture, adding a subtle complexity to the lower third of the composition. So what do I mean by that? More rectangles, right? Lots of rectangles down here. I just didn't detail all of them, okay? But there's lots of other, that pattern repeats itself just through smaller features. We'll return to the furniture later, but first we must continue to the work's overall structure. I'd like to discuss the asymmetry of this work. First, notice that the vertical dimension can be divided into thirds. The first break is dividing the top is at St. Matthew's eye level. The second break is the book and the table edge. How do we know this? Why am I not just like drawing random lines on the painting? These are the two primary horizontal lines in the work. There's another one at the bottom, but it's not a major division in the painting, and we're going to discuss that later. This is where kind of our eye falls on a horizontal level, like scanning up and down vertically. Where do we stop? And we can see those I think are pretty clear. These are asymmetric because the painting can't be divided in half vertically and maintain a mirrored reflection, right? So I didn't really discuss symmetry very much in the calling, but the calling was also asymmetric, right? 5 figures on the left, 2 on the right, right? Top to bottom was completely different, right? So symmetry refers to, if you can fold it in half, it can be kind of mirrored. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but remember in the first version of this painting, it's fairly symmetric, right? Because you can, if you fold it down the middle, you don't have the exact same on either side, but you have the figures kind of St. Matthew on one side, the angel on the other. Their heads are about the same level, right? The body's at the same level. Okay, so everything is kind of symmetrical. This is not symmetrical in that way. The asymmetry continues along the horizontal dimension to even a greater degree. While the vertical elements are balanced throughout, the horizontal are not. Notice that the only symmetrical section is the angel and his robes. The middle section is completely asymmetric, with the right side only a negative space, and the bottom shows more symmetry, but again, with mostly negative space. Okay, so why is the angel more symmetric, right? Because you can divide him. He's got one arm on either side, right? And then his robes form circles, right, or half circles, right, in both sides. So you can kind of see how that's at least somewhat symmetric. This is completely asymmetric in the middle section, right? Because we have a body here and we have nothing here, right? And this is kind of in between those, right? This provides some of the symmetry there with his. So we've got a vertical element here, a somewhat vertical element there for his leg, but then we have, the negative space here is also becomes, allows it to be asymmetric. We do see, however, that the horizontal division falls along the angel's hands, a major compositional element in the top third of the work, and bisects the stool in the bottom third. Right, so that line, this is directly in the middle of the painting, goes right through the hands of the angel, right? And those kind of points are intentional, right? Caravaggio is doing that on purpose. Like our eyes go there kind of and meet in the middle there, right? And then it bisects the stool, okay? Again, right in the middle. The angel's compositional volume then being the only object placed in the top third and the only symmetrical object in the work emphasizes its visual importance. Next, I'd like to discuss plane. When we say plane in a painting, we refer to the effect of creating virtual planes of depth on a two-dimensional surface by the use of perspective. The foreground appears to be what is closest to the viewer. The midground is usually where the main subjects are placed, and the background appears to be furthest from the viewer. This effect is created by making the foreground figures and objects slightly larger the midground more detailed, and the background darker, muted, or with less detail. And we see Caravaggio is very good about making backgrounds kind of fall into almost nothing, right? There's usually very plain walls or dark areas or things like that. He really focuses your attention on the midground. While the calling was relatively simple in its use of plane, this painting is both more subtle and provides a key to the work's use of line. So we see the corner of the book and the table are in the foreground. This is what appears to be closest to us, right? The corner of the stool also. We're going to talk about more of about that later. The figures are in the midground, and the back of the table recedes into the background. Okay, so here, it's pretty dark, but it's down here. Okay. Also, and I realized this after as I was working through later. This is important. This will be relevant later. This is the angel's foot, right, which also falls into the background, but it's illuminated by the source of light, right? But it's only because it's lit that we notice it, right? So that's also kind of on the plane of the background because it's much behind him. Notice that none of the primary volumes are perpendicular to the viewer here. Remember, in the calling, the table, the stools, and the figures are all at right angles to the viewer. And indeed, most face the viewer directly or away from the viewer. So remember, if you're looking at the calling, there are 3 figures seated around St. Matthew and 2 other figures who are facing the viewer, right? There's one to the left, and he's at 90 degrees, right? And there's another one who is, his back is to us, okay? And then there's Jesus and probably St. Peter, right? And Jesus faces us, right? He's kind of obscured, and then St. Peter's back is to us, right? They're all at 90 degrees in some way, right? And so are the table, so are the stool, they're all kind of facing us in particular ways. But here, nearly all the elements are variously angled towards or away from the viewer. These are important to note when we're going to talk about the line here. While it's not necessarily the most important line in the painting, note that the only one note the only one that spans all 3 planes. It's the long edge of the table. All right, so this is kind of a perpendicular line. This line goes from foreground all the way to the background, right? It cuts through all 3. Let's call that angle 45 degrees relative to the viewer, turned away from the viewer. Okay, so it's going back into space at 45 degrees. Okay. The stool below is turned about 90 degrees relative to the table. Thus, again, 45 degrees to the viewer. But the stool itself is also vertically askew. St. Matthew himself is rotated at different angles in multiple directions. From back to front, his shoulders are parallel to the stool and at a right angle to the table. But vertically, they are pointed upwards, leading our eye to the angel. Oops. So back to front, he's in parallel with the stool and at 90 degrees to the table, but vertically, he's also at 45 degrees relative to us, but going up, right, towards the angel. The angel's body follows the angle of the table, going back It's just up and down instead of at a decreasing angle relative to the horizontal. His lower leg, and this is what I mentioned before, is at a 90-degree angle to his body, which we can see because his foot is illuminated just slightly. So this is why I mentioned that earlier, okay? You can see that the only way you could see that his lower leg was bent is because his foot is illuminated, okay? His shoulders are parallel to St. Matthew's. All of these receding lines and angles are contrasted with the one flat line, the surface on which St. Matthew and the table are placed. This surface emphasizes all the other varied angles that Caravaggio employs throughout the painting. So this is a contrast, right? We have all of these different angles. The different angles wouldn't be as effective if we didn't have some reference, right? Some plain, simple, horizontal, 180-degree reference in relation to the viewer, okay? There are many other things to explore here, many other angles, and that I'm not going to get into. Notice briefly, however, that the limbs of each figure are angled to maintain the pattern, but at different angles to provide variation within that pattern. So you can bring home your card later and look at all the different angles of the limbs, okay? And notice how this pattern of how Caravaggio places the limbs maintains the pattern of this, either 45 degrees or 90 degrees. Furthermore, the curved lines of the angel's robes are in complete contrast to the other lines in the painting and add to his visual interest. Our eye finds the angel and follows his swirling robes over and over again. So when I'm looking at this painting, so first of all, notice that we have the one rectilinear line, this is kind of the straight line right here, and the curvilinear lines are up here, right, in complete contrast to each other, right? That's the first thing. But notice you just get this kind of swirling action constantly. You just kind of just keep going around and around with, you can do the big circle or all the way around. You can kind of go in like a whirlpool almost, and you're just kind of lost in this, in the shapes that Caravaggio has created with the angel's robes. It's quite magnificent. Okay, so remember I said that we were going to return to symmetry. We needed to examine line first. I've shown that the predominant repeating pattern of line throughout the work is one of diagonals, and that all of those are relative to the foreground, the midground, and the backgrounds. Once we see that repetition, I think we can see a different kind of symmetry, one that is neither vertical nor horizontal, but that runs along the diagonal in multiple planes simultaneously. This diagonal, which cuts across the horizontal and vertical dimensions of the painting, but also across the planes, show that St. Matthew and the angel are mirrored. We can now see more clearly that the torsos of St. Matthew and the angel are at 90 degrees to each other. The line bisects them. Next, imagine that the angel is turned to face St. Matthew, but their bodies stay in position. So imagine that we could kind of, in 3 dimensions, bend the painting at that line that I just added, okay? Right here, right here. So usually we think of symmetry as being kind of horizontal or vertical, right? And it's just kind of, but here he's doing it on the third at an angle, okay? And what do we see when we see that? What happens? St. Matthew's right arm and the angel's left arm are at the same obtuse angle. St. Matthew's left arm and the angel's right arm are at the same right angle. Their hands are positioned together. They both have their hands together, just in slightly different ways, right? And of course, their torsos remain at the same relative angle to each other. Is that clear? Does that make sense to people, right? So it was only through the process of going through and examining the lines and the structure that I was finally able to kind of figure this out and see what was going on here. This is an incredibly complex and wonderful painting, but clearly a lot of design. that went into it. There's a lot I'm not able to cover tonight. Caravaggio's use of light or tone, how he employed color, how this is the only painting of the three in which St. Matthew has a halo. No, I don't know why. Or even Caravaggio's apparent insistence that St. Matthew's feet be bare and visible to the audience, albeit in a far more subtle way. But I do want to look briefly at the stool placed precariously over the edge of the base. Did anyone notice that? Yeah, did you see? Okay, good. No, that's okay. First, the stools in this painting and in the calling are nearly identical. Not exactly, but close enough to provide a visual continuity between the two paintings that are displayed next to each other. Remember, these are paintings that are right next to each other, okay? I don't know that there's any significance, right? I don't think St. Matthew went through his life carrying a stool around, and this is the one he had. Very likely this is the stool that Caravaggio has in his studio, right? And he gave it a little bit of variety between the two to kind of show that he's like not it's not the exact same thing, but still, it's of note, right? Second, we must discuss this precarious stool, seemingly protruding from the canvas, excuse me. Indeed, that is very much the intention. This is a technique in painting called, and excuse my French, trompe-l'oeil, which means deceive the eye, and whose goal is to present a two-dimensional surface as entering a third dimension, usually towards the viewer. I'm going to show some other uses of this technique. Also in a religious painting, the Annunciation diptych by Jan van Eyck, circa 1435, nearly 200 years prior to Caravaggio. This is a painting. What does it look like? Statues, right? Note how the figures are painted to appear to be statues. And Van Eyck paints highly realistic and even worn-looking frames behind them, complete with shadows cast from the statues to give the appearance that the figures protrude from the frame. The tonality, right? He paints them like as if they were stone or marble, right? The way that the light hits them, right, it creates this incredible volume, right? And they think that there may have been a third panel too. They're not sure this is, and even, he, just like you would with a statue, he engraves the Ave Gratia Plena, is the kind of shortened version up there. So a scene from the Annunciation. All right, another example of this just a few years later. This is a portrait of a Carthusian by Petrus Christus. Do you see it? Anyone? Raise your hand if you see the trompe-l'oeil. No? Petrus paints what appears as a frame so that he can also paint a fly sitting on it, as if the frame and the fly are part of our own three-dimensional world and not of the painting's two-dimensional one, right? You see it down there? So we'll go back and, right? So this looks like a very kind of serious religious painting, and then as your eye is kind of going around, you wait a minute, is there a fly on the painting? And yes and no, right? It's not an actual fly sitting on the edge of the frame, it's just a painted-in fly. So, all right, so we've seen some examples of this, it's a tradition, right? So returning to the Caravaggio. In order for this technique to be convincing, he needed to paint the horizontal base at the bottom in order for the stool to appear to be leaning over something. toward the viewer, right? If you didn't have this kind of, this wooden beam here, right, there wouldn't be anything for the stool to lean over, right? I do not believe, however, that Caravaggio used this technique simply for its effect or to demonstrate his talent. He wasn't trying to play a joke or a trick like the fly, right? Rather, that base also sets the horizontal line in the painting, which we've discussed, which is also then repeated in the table, both of the support at the bottom, the tabletop, and the book. Further, this unbalanced stool, the angle it establishes, and the position it allows for St. Matthew's body become integral to the entire work, full of greater and lesser angles and twists throughout. In other words, if Caravaggio hadn't put in that, it would have been very difficult for him to maintain and establish and maintain those different angles all throughout, right? Think back to the line analysis that we did before, right? Where the stool is at a 45-degree angle and slightly tilted, right? And that makes St. Matthew off kilter, and that puts him at a strange angle and relative to let's say, for example, the calling, right? So he's kind of turned and twisted in various ways, right? That's all possible because of this trompe l'oeil. All right, final words. My goal tonight was to demonstrate the high degree of order and integration of parts that Caravaggio has achieved in this work. The effort of analysis and the time you spent listening to my analysis should not, I hope, diminish your appreciation and enjoyment of the painting. Rather, it should illuminate the work and increase the delight you experience in gazing upon the whole. In a couple months, I'll be back with the final lecture in this series, and we'll be discussing the martyrdom of St. Matthew. I hope to see you then, and thank you. Questions, yeah?
Where are these kept? Are they in church or in the...
Yes, remarkably, I mean, and thankfully they're, most religious paintings, are off in museums somewhere, but these are still in the same place where they were commissioned to be. So the pilgrims who went to Italy last year, they were able to see the real paintings in their home. Sandy ordered these prints. I ordered the little cards.
But are they in parish or are they given out?
Oh, yeah, sorry, yes. So they kind of are on rotation. So for a while they were in that little chapel area, and the other ones, I think they're all in your office right now, right? Yeah. So they come out for this, and so when maybe once Lent is over, then they'll return to that space. Yeah, so you can see them all. Yeah.
I'm wondering if Aramaic was also a written language or just a spoken language, because the point about the first rejected painting, the St. Matthew in Hebrew, if that was historically accurate, it would have more likely been Aramaic or perhaps even Greek.
Yeah, and the Gospels come to us now, they come to the earliest church in Greek, so it's historically inaccurate, right? But it shows the intention of the author to address a certain audience at the time. So I think that's kind of how to Sandy, yeah?
Yeah, you know how the stool is off kilter?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I mean, to me it suggests like movement, that St. Matthew isn't just like, hunched over writing, that he's like, his garments look like they're moving, he's paying attention to the detail. To me it's makes him more dynamic, that he's not just sitting like in the other painting. He's kind of, I don't know, I picture him kind of rocking back and forth a little. Like he's excited and he's listening and he's being inspired, he's writing. And I don't know, to me that was a hugely important part of it. It also makes me want to fix it. Because like I'm afraid it's going to fall off.
Right.
But
Yeah, it really is a wonderful technique when employed in a way that kind of incorporates it into the whole work. I don't think the fly incorporates into the whole work, right? So this is the use of the technique that kind of maintains the integrity. Yeah, go ahead.
How come the angel wings are so dark?
Yeah, again, I'm not really sure. Being as attentive as he is, as Caravaggio is to composition, I imagine that, one of the, I think one of the difficulties in the first version was that the wings are so white and that our eye always tends to go to the brightest elements. And what's one of the things I really talked about here, but these are still the brightest areas, but notice they're asymmetric again, so they balance from here, right? So this is another bright area, this is another bright area, and so it's kind of like these patterns of three, and we get these kind of motions throughout that kind of keep our eye moving. I think if he had white wings and white robes, you wouldn't see anything else but the angel. Because remember, the angel's wings are going to have patterns that look like feathers, right? And so it's not just kind of a simple white surface, right? It's going to have pattern that's going to draw your eye as well. So it might just be for compositional use. But it's very interesting that it's just so drastic. I mean, that's one of the biggest changes between the two versions. Yeah, that's a good question. Oh, so we're just sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
Just a question about what, is the painting on canvas or is it on the wall?
I think it's canvas, yeah, and then it's installed into the wall. Yeah, sure.
The question about the wings, could that be an issue of conservatorship? In other words, if the painting is it's 400 years old, if it's restored, you see examples of before and after a restoration sometimes, and details come out that were really unapparent prior to
Oh, I see.
So I just wondered if it ever has been restored, if that's known.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Obviously, in churches, as paintings in churches are meant to be religious objects there, but they're also subject to a lot of smoke from candles, incense, and things like that. And so, it could be that if these, and I don't know if this one has ever been restored, but you might be able to get a little bit more detail out of that. Although Caravaggio was not embarrassed by using dark tones, right, for areas he did not want to emphasize. So, but I mean, it's almost, he really doesn't want you to see, even if we can, even if you increase it by, a kind of a level of gray, they're still going to be pretty dark. So, yeah.
Two things is with the stool being like that there, and him looking up, if he was intent on doing what the angel was telling him to do in the book, it's almost like he was startled. And maybe the part of the stool came out
I see.
as far as balance.
Yeah.
And the other thing is when you're using, you're trying to proportionally level out something, you use ones, threes, and fives. Use an odd number, so you have the center point and the outside points that balance the picture.
Right. Yeah. So his
Doesn't matter where the light is.
right. So his point at the end is you need an odd number to kind of create a middle point. Otherwise, it's going to be it'll be uneven. Yeah.
His hands of St. Matthew, he's got a perfect tripod grip on that delicate hand.
Yes.
It looks to me like they're having some kind of conversation because the angel's maybe telling him, do you have that parable right or something. And he's hesitating because his hand is up a little.
Yep.
What did you say?
Yeah. One of the
The sense of the dialogue going.
Yeah, for sure. And here it seems to be, to me, it looks, the angel is speaking and giving the points. Okay, so first you're going to, this and this and this. This is what we're going to talk about, right? And so St. Matthew's waiting for him to kind of go through the process, and right, and we know that St. Matthew, as a tax collector, was an educated person, right? He would know how to write, and so yes, his grip on that quill is impressive. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and again, and so by the time Caravaggio would have been alive, it would be books, right? So so it's a good point, right? So, and this is the danger of trying to read too much into any historical painting, right? Because we saw in The Calling, for example, that the St. Matthew and his compatriots were not dressed like, first century Romans or first century Jews. They were dressed like Renaissance Italians, and likewise, like we saw in the first version, St. Matthew wouldn't probably be writing in Hebrew to a Greek audience, right? To a Greek reading audience, I should say, right? And so likewise, they didn't have, they wouldn't have had journals like blank, bound blank pages, right? You'd write your manuscripts on sheets, right? That would be, copied later, right? Or you write it on a scroll or something like that, right? So this is why we can't just kind of simply read an image like this as if it were history, because you just constantly find the flaws, right? And then you just disregard the work, like, well, this isn't worth anything, right? All right. Anything else? Thank you very much. And have a good evening.
So this was 1602,
Yeah.
so it was after the Gutenberg press in the 1500s.
Yep.
Which is what, 1540s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, did you go to any other places and do your talks?
No. This is the St. Matthew's has asked me to kind of do these. I haven't done this elsewhere before. Yeah. So.
Do a lot with art, or?
Yeah. So I'm a photographer. I'm also trained as an academic. I've done a lot of teaching in other areas, but in terms of like this kind of analysis, I haven't done it
Did
all.
you go down to the museums in Nantucket?
No, I've not been to Nantucket.
My cousin, she's pretty involved in the community. She's currently curator at the museum.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
We're on a first-name basis. I've got a couple of people her name's Susan McFarlane.
Okay.
She's been living in Nantucket for years and years. And I think that's the type of people that, not that everybody doesn't enjoy art. And there's other places too. Look at different paintings. And I remember having little paintings this big when I was in Baroque school.
Mm-hmm.
And, just unbelievable that they did that. I was probably 7.
Yeah, sure.
But, so she does that. She's on the first name basis. They run a lot of charity things down there.
Yeah.
For scholarship, believe it or not, it's probably 1% in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they're running all types of events down there. So part of that is in conjunction with the museum. It's two people's names. I don't think it's a husband and wife.
Okay.
It is. They have different last names.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. And you can see balancing out stuff. Even in American, my son does a lot of stuff with the American Folk Museum
Oh, yeah.
in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
So you see some of that stuff on there. If you get a chance to look on there, it's real interesting. There was a Indian shooting an arrow that was on display there. So he's an artist in his own way. He doesn't. He does art. But I'm saying, man, where'd that thing come from? I guess it came from Haymarket.
Okay.
It was a Woodhaven Haymarket. And he says, I I hope those things you build, I know they are. I says, I hope those things you build are strong. I said, that looks pretty expensive.
Right, yeah.
He says, how much is that worth? So I went and looked it up. And I don't know when it was sold or what. It got sold to Sotheby's.
So what's that?
It
Because,
sold at Sotheby's.
okay, yep, okay.
It was $4.6 million. I'm saying, well, it was good that they had you doing the work, because he does it for him every year.
Okay, yeah.
He's down in Manhattan, he spends weeks and weeks. He lives in Brooklyn.
Okay.
He lives in,
Yeah.
upstate New York, up near.
Oh, okay.
Something. So you're going to be back in a month? I don't want.
No, about 2 months. Yeah, I think it's in May. I think is the last one. Yeah.
So that is going to be on the same painting.
Nope.
Different one.
Different than the martyrdom of St.
Oh,
Matthew.
so-
So the third painting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
That's interesting.
yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to show you that I have this beautiful book, and it has the martyrdom of St. Peter by Caravaggio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let me see, here it is.
Yeah.
Talk about-
Yeah.
Whoa. Now, when they paint this, he's thinking of all this. He's doing all that geometry.
Yeah. I really think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
Yeah.
it would just be a mess,
I
right?
know.
You've got to plan it out so that so you know. I mean, this is like
So this this.
I
this
know,
James
right?
is
Yes.
to take care of.
Yeah.
And the angle of St. Peter and this,
Yeah. But even look at like the
yeah,
like,
that
look,
linear, yeah.
like look at
It's
how
like a
that
V.
yeah, right. And
This is the martyrdom of St. Peter in this book.
also by Caravaggio.
Oh, really?
And this is 1601, so this is painted between
Oh, yeah.
the first two of St. Matthew and then this one. So he was very busy at that time.
Yeah.
You know.
And you know Ralph Barnett, his book